Welcome to another installment of Read Woke with the Cedar Rapids Public Library. Today we are so grateful to have Kelly Montijo Fink with us. She is a resident of the Corridor area. She is a musician, an educator, and an advocate, making a big difference in our community. Before we get into the interview, if you need a quick reminder, let me tell you briefly about the Read Woke program. Read Woke is a national program which was developed originally by school librarian Cicely Lewis. It encourages readers to deliberately read books which challenge a social norm, which provide information about a group that has been disenfranchised. The books have a protagonist from an underrepresented group or an oppressed group. They seek to challenge a social norm. They give voice to the voiceless. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Kelly Montijo Fink. Hi, this is Meredith with the Cedar Rapids Public Library, and this afternoon for our Read Woke program, we have a very special guest. With us today is Kelly Montijo Fink, and she is a woman that wears many remarkable hats. And I think it would do best if she would take a moment to introduce herself to our fabulous Metro Library patrons.
Sure. As Meredith said, my name is Kelly Montijo Fink. I am Chiricahua Apache, Mexican and Spanish. My native name is White Sparrow. And I do wear many hats. I'm a mom, although our kids are out of the house now. We have one in college and one off in the work world. And I'm a singer-songwriter, and I am an instructor at Kirkwood, language instructor, both Spanish and English language acquisition. What else? I serve on the Commission for Native American Affairs here in the state of Iowa. And yeah, I just love arts and creativity in general.
Well, I think and books, right? I feel like I hit the jackpot on this, an artist, an educator, and I don't know, I just find it so remarkable, all the different ways that you kind of exist in the world. I feel like between being able to be creative and to write songs, not only to sing them and to navigate, like, I think it's very poetic when you talk about your own voice and how you use your voice then literally to convey a message like that. It's really a special thing. I'm curious, when did you start writing songs and performing?
Oh gosh, for as long as I can remember, I remember singing, first of all. Yeah. And just to respond to something you just said, to me, songs are musical books with shorter chapters. And then you get the whole collection in one album of all these songs to listen to. But I started writing music. I used to spend summers with my grandmother, and I think I remember around 9 or 10 just plopping down at her piano and trying to make things up that sounded good. I didn't really know how to play the piano, but I knew what sounded right in my own brain at that point. And I think that was kind of the start of it, but nothing really formal until much later in life. I would say 30s, mid 30s, late 30s. Yeah, so I'm going to be 50 this year. Woo!
In 2020?
Yes.
Because I turned 40 in 2020. So I'm like, why not? Right?
Great. That's right. It's never too late, right? You have to try anything new.
Well, that's so interesting too. So I'll take a step back and ask another question then. So in terms of, if you serve on the board, the commission,
Commission, yeah.
Then I feel like you have a strong heart for advocacy. And then also, certainly being a teacher, you have to advocate for your students and what they need for, when it comes to language acquisition, people's lives depend on that for, getting jobs and furthering their education and stuff like that. When do you feel like, or have you ever felt like you had a moment where you became an advocate? Or has it always been a part of how you've lived?
I think certainly awareness of community and the community that surrounds you, and where you fit in community. And I love that you chose that word advocacy, because so many times if you are other than the dominant culture, you're an activist. And to me, that's like, that has sometimes some negative connotations to it, but advocate is like, who doesn't want an advocate for them, for their life personally, for their community? And it's a much more positive look at your activity. And so, you know what, probably other people have identified it in me earlier than I identified it myself.
Yeah.
In fact, I had a friend years ago. The reason I'm on the commission was years ago, I had a friend that actually ran for the governorship of the state. And he's just like, you know, there's something you would do well at this commission. You would serve well. And I was like, well, maybe. And so it's kind of how I got my foot in the door there. I just applied, went through the process, and it's been a learning experience. I mean, my coming through the first couple meetings was like, what am I doing here? We have lawyers, we have social workers, we have people that work in the jails or the prison systems, or that have that connection. And I thought, I'm an artist. What am I doing here? But then that in itself, if you think of the history of arts being advocacy itself for community, and the way you can make something more palatable in a song than it is with a direct conversation sometimes. And so I thought, oh, there's a place for me at this table. It is. And so I've enjoyed the process of working with my fellow commissioners and bringing something to the table in my realm of, I wouldn't say expertise, but just experience.
How long have you been on the commission?
Since 2012.
2012. That's a long time.
It's been a while. Yeah.
That's a lot of consistency. Have issues changed, or the things that you discuss, has that changed a lot over the course of the last several years?
It's the same, a lot of the same conversations, but what has changed is the awareness of the population in Iowa to issues in Indian country. I mean, a fellow commissioner and I went to Marion High School because of the mascots, and had some discussions with an English class there, and that was fabulous, but it wouldn't have happened unless people would have known that we existed. Yeah. And I got to there because of my job at Kirkwood. My director knows, our department director knows that I serve on the commission. And one of the gentlemen that was teaching this English class was also an adjunct instructor at Kirkwood. So it got down the pipeline, and word spread, and I was able to have that opportunity. So I would say that people are more aware, and we finally, after, I think since the formation of the commission in 2012, they've been trying to get a display in the Capitol building for First Nations in Iowa, those that have historically had a presence and still do here. And it took all this time. This just happened last year that we finally got this display.
Are you kidding?
That was fabulous. No, I'm not. That's what I'm saying.
I know government takes a while, but.
It takes a while, but yeah, and I think it really helped that we have now, he's been on the commission the past couple of years, but we've got a former military, retired military. I'm like, it took government to talk to government. We got it done, and it was phenomenal, and people were excited about it. And so that's why we're still having some of the same conversations, but like I said, the difference is people are a little more aware than they used to be.
Well, I hadn't planned on asking this. It just occurred to me though. Do you feel comfortable commenting, or, you know, just kind of talking out a little? What are some issues, or what are some things that, like First Nation people, Native Americans, Indigenous people, specifically in Iowa, have to deal with that maybe other regions of the country it's not quite the same? Is there anything in particular?
For Iowa in particular, so it's a little bit different too. A lot of people, let me just say this, the general mindset of Americans towards Native Americans is that most of us live on reservations. That's not true. We're in big cities, and there's a whole history behind that with relocation and adoption out and that kind of thing. And here in Iowa, we have the Meskwaki, who live on a settlement, not on a reservation. And it's called a settlement because they actually bought their land back from the US government. It was taken, they moved, but they purchased it back. So it's a little bit different than, and they will correct you every time if you say the Meskwaki Reservation, they will say, no, it's our settlement. It's our community. So we have the Ponca out on the western side of the state that crosses actually Nebraska and Iowa.
Okay.
So we certainly have some tribal commissioners too that are from the Ponca people. I don't know if there are issues that I would say across the nation that are similar in Indian country. Right now we're talking a lot about missing and murdered Indigenous women. A lot of people don't know about that. This is a national epidemic. We have a pandemic and we have an epidemic in Indian country. And part of that is legal jurisdiction. If a white man abuses, rapes, whatever, a native woman on Indian land, the justice is really sticky. He can't be prosecuted on Indian land. So we're looking at things like VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act, and where we can make impact and influence with the language specifically for that to benefit Native peoples when they do need to prosecute those kinds of crimes. Natural resources, another big one. There are a lot of issues.
Yeah. Wow. I find that really interesting, what you said about using language to help, protect people and give them extra tools, and how interesting for you as a language teacher and, and a songwriter. Like, I find it just another way for you to use language to support people,
One of the things when I went to the school in Marion to talk about the mascots, even that word mascot, as a linguist, I love historical linguistics. I love to find the origins of words. It comes from the Spanish and it means pet. So your mascot is your pet. And the problem with that is calling Native people less than human reflects even on our history, because Native people were not considered American citizens until 2 years after women got the right to vote, because they were considered less than human. So there's a lot of history that people could learn. And I had kids say to me in that class, well, we can honor Native people by having a Native mascot. And I'm like, do you know Native people? Have you had interactions? How can you honor people that you don't know? It's only the way you perceive honor should be. And that's a lot of times incorrect if you really don't know the people. So,
what an important conversation to have with young people. They might not be able to have that kind of conversation in their household, and to get them at that level, like that kind of on the cusp of adulthood, where, that's a really formative conversation to have with someone. About how do you see the world?
Right. And what I find is a lot of people have mindsets that are been passed down from generations, and they don't even recognize that it's been passed down just because it was the way people spoke in their home, their parents, their grandparents. And so when that kind of language comes out, to give you an example that's somewhat related, when I was teaching a Spanish class, this wasn't at Kirkwood, it was at another campus, we were talking about some cultural issues and a people group in particular, and this young man swears under his breath, but I can still hear it, and he says, blah, 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 and he was referring to the people group that we were talking about. And I stopped the class and I said, excuse me, have you ever met anybody from this culture? Well, no. Then why do you have that opinion or, commentary?
Yeah.
And he says, well, it's what I heard my grandfather say. And he was simply repeating what he heard his grandfather say. And so there's a lot of that's, I don't think people intentionally carry that forward, but sometimes.
But it's toxic.
Yeah, and it spreads, like you said, toxic, it spreads. And you don't know the damage you do with your words.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving right along from there, right? I'm like, speaking of words. Well, but it's a perfect segue though, because I think that's part of what like this Read Woke program is all about. Like, so many people just haven't been exposed to reading other people writing in their own voices, because like there have been marginalized people that just haven't been accepted in publishing industries, right? Or they move through small presses, or for any number of reasons. Or it's like, well, my book club just always reads this or
the
that.
bestseller.
Yeah, it's true. maybe we do some Barbara Kingsolver and call it crazy. I don't know. But for whatever it's worth, it's like, this is such a good opportunity to introduce lots of different voices, perspectives, and words that,
Sure.
like using language for good.
An intercultural book club would be fabulous. And then you can, if somebody is leading that book study, if they're from that culture, they give that insight into the book and why people think the way they think in their culture. And I think it's really what's going on now in 2020, not the COVID part, but the other thing, protests, right? Yeah. It's people finally having the courage, not that they didn't have the courage before, to share their stories. It's 2020 is the year of sharing our stories and hoping that people listen in a way that maybe they didn't listen before. And the second part of that is hoping they believe us. Because people be like, oh, that can't be real. That can't be true. If I told you I have a friend whose mother was in a residential school and had her hair washed with gasoline, why is there, in these residential schools historically, why are there cemeteries there? There are no other public schools in the nation where there are cemeteries. You have to ask yourself questions. Right. They were taken from their families because you can't raise your children. We're going to show you how children should be raised. And basically the whole theology, it was a theology because it was also a man that was tied in with his church, but kill the Indian, save the man. And so there was a lot of abuse going on. But do people believe those stories? There's still people in the United States fighting for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for things like residential schools. There's one up in Canada, there's one in Africa, South Africa, where they just simply invited people to come in and write their stories down or tell their stories so someone could write them down. And they have volumes in Canada now of these stories that nobody could believe. But you know what? So many similarities. It's just like, it's so true. And I think people are waking up to, this is part of our history. It's not nice, but it's almost like if you know something, you can't be the same.
No, I think that is such a sublime way to say it, because it is both beautiful and scary. It's true. What you sent me a link to a movie, the Dakota 38. Yes. Is that right?
Yes.
And I watched that, and it was a story that I had never heard. And I think that's one of there's so many frightening things about discovering your history as a white person, because it's horrific. Like all of this stuff. I mean, it's not, I just went poor white person, right? But there are so many things that we have to learn and need to know in order to understand like the informed trauma of entire groups of people. Like it's really, I don't know, it's a necessary thing. And I really appreciate how you said 2020 is like the year of sharing stories. I think that's a wonderful way to look at it.
And I do want to be clear that there is no perfect culture or people group out there. We've all had our things in our past and our histories. Native Americans too have had committed atrocities. And we don't want to say, we're the victims, look at us, you all are wrong, you all are guilty. That doesn't solve any problem, which is, the idea is to come together for reconciliation and for healing, for understanding. And so I don't subscribe to that, y'all are wrong, we're all been victimized. And it takes when you do that, you take no responsibility for your own healing too. So I think that's really important to say.
This is a side note. Have you read My Grandmother's Hands?
Mm-mm.
It's a book about dealing with racialized trauma, and it is a beautiful book. It's written by a licensed social worker and counselor, and it's great for people on both sides of a coin, so to speak, in terms of like being mindful of how trauma affects your body and stories of trauma and generations of trauma inflicted upon, like a minority group, like really affects you to your physical body. And it has little breakouts where you can breathe and think and have kind of moments to help process it. And I think I I think that is kind of a bottom line for understanding, no matter who you are. Like when you can identify how traumatic these events really are,
Right.
and what it does. I mean, when I could go down a whole nother rabbit hole, but it's acknowledging that and being able to move through those moments and feelings and come back together. Like you said, I agree. Oh, this is just the best. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm in therapy right now.
You can lay down on your couch.
I need my emotional support animal right here. I do have cats and dogs around. They may
we do
come
too.
in. But before we close out, I was wondering, do you have some recommendations for our patrons, for all of us, something to read to take with us from this conversation?
Yeah. For books, I'm actually maybe about 3/4 of the way through it now, but I've loved it so much that I will recommend it. It's called Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. Yes, you have it. Yay. Fabulous book. I mean, so many things that I'm learning from that book that are just astounding. And it's the history you never learned in school. So I think it's really important. Yeah.
Yes, this is interesting too. I have, for young people, there's a version for YA and for adults.
Yes,
So
yes, for sure.
I chose the one for young adults. No judgment. That's mine.
Yeah, no, not at all. I like picture books too. I'm going to throw in 2 lectures too. One's actually a TED Talk that's easily accessible by Mark Charles, who's actually Diné. He's Navajo. He's running for president. You probably have never heard of him, but he gives a real wonderful talk about we the people and the Constitution and who it's geared towards and who it is not.
And everyone should listen to this.
Who's included and who's not included. Yeah, amazing. And then Kevin Gover's lecture, which I sent you a link to, so I think that'll go up on your materials. Again, it's history of the United States that you probably haven't heard. So yeah, amazing. Now on the lighter side, a film I will recommend, because most people think of the stoic natives, right? They're just this face. Native people have a tremendous sense of humor. And one of my favorite rom-coms is called Christmas in the Clouds. And it really shows you, okay, so I'm married to a man of German heritage. I mean, through and through German. And he's very linear, and I'm very cyclical. So communication styles, our first years of marriage, were like looking at each other cross-eyed, like, I don't understand you. This movie is very cyclical in its storytelling, and I won't give it away, but it is very funny. So that's one of my favorites.
That's so great. That's so great. Well, I think something that I really appreciated too about all the different resources that you sent ahead of time for me to look at and for me to post on a Tumblr blog for you all to see after this, but is that it was a really diverse body of media, books and lectures and movies, but also, I mean, like, seeing people as people. I think that's one of the problems of not being represented at all, right? Like, if you can't see somebody in a romantic comedy, because most characters are white, like, how are you supposed to see them in your own community, kind of, right?
And you just
everyone has real lives.
Yeah, you've just hit a nail on the head too, historically, that you don't probably know that you did. Most native tribes, their names for themselves mean the people. Meskwaki means people of the red earth. A lot of times people would, okay, so for Apache, the people, but we were called something else. Oh, I'm sorry, actually, Tene is Apache. Flip that around. The word Apache comes from the Zuni word Apachu, and so when Europeans came, they said, who are those people? Are they your people? They said, no, they're the enemy. So the word that got assigned to us was enemy. For the Lakota, again, it means the people, but they're called the Sioux, which is a derivative of a neighboring tribe they didn't always get along with that called them little snakes. So that's the greater population knows Sioux, not Lakota. And so it's like reclaiming the names we have for ourselves is significant too. People, humans. Yeah.
I think that is just a lovely note to end on right there. You said it so well, so well. I know I referenced it in our conversation, but for all of you out there viewing at home, there will be links to Kelly has a website that you should totally check out. Go look and see some of her beautiful music. You can find a link to a Tumblr page that I made that has links to this long list of resources that Kelly had sent me ahead of time. And so go find some movies, go find some books, go find some things to add to your Read Woke list. And with that, was there anything else that you felt like you needed to say? I feel like I kind of just rambled.
No, I feel like we just hit a buffet.
We did. There's a lot to go over in a short amount of time. So we hit a bunch. It's true. But for all of us here at the Cedar Rapids Public Library, we want to thank all of you for watching.
If you would like to follow the esteemed Kelly Montijo Fink, you can see here there are 2 ways to keep track of what she's up to. One, she has her own website, kellymontajofink.com. You can also follow her on Facebook. I've just shown a sample here. Here are 4 of her albums at the bottom, if you want to take a listen to her singer-songwriting skills as well. Kelly also mentioned that she serves on the Commission for the Office of Native American Affairs, which is part of the Iowa Department of Human Rights. I would encourage you to take a look at that website. Not only does it give you a better picture about the Indigenous population of Iowa and the issues that people here face, but also it's got some resources. I noticed there was a sample letter for writing to a various entity. You can sub out your own information, but if you want to write a letter because a mascot, for instance, is offensive, there are resources on that website as well. Additionally, you can see some of the recommendations that Kelly made for all of us. Here is Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. I've shown you the cover for the newest edition for adults and the young adult edition. We also have an ebook copy on Hoopla, so if you're a Marion or Cedar Rapids resident, you can access that ebook on Hoopla. And on the lighter side, here is Christmas in the Clouds, written and directed by Kate Montgomery. It's a 2001 film, and according to the Internet Movie Database, as you can see here, it's the first contemporary romantic comedy to feature an almost entirely American Indian cast. We have We the People by Mark Charles, and Why Americans Should Unlearn Their History by Kevin Gover. And just to remind you, this link here at the top, the tinyurl.com/readwokekmf, there are links to these lectures, to an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, as well as a long list of other resources. As always, if you have any questions about the Read Woke Challenge, please contact the library at 319-261-READ. or visit crlibrary.org. From all of us here at the Cedar Rapids Public Library, thanks for watching.